on to our last presentation of the afternoon. SubhanAllah. We're there. So on to the last presentation here. I want you guys to pay extra attention, inshallah, for this one, as it's the last one, and you never know where the benefit and the nasiha for your own self will be. So make sure, inshallah, for this last presentation, you are giving extra attention here, and that you are remaining silent, and you're asking your friends to also remain silent, inshallah, so that we can enjoy the presentation together. So with that, I'd like to invite Ahnaf Naheen up to the stage. Our interaction with non-Muslims. Ahnaf Naheen.
Alright, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm the last presenter, so inshallah we'll be going home very soon. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Today, my topic is how our Prophet ﷺ interacted with non-Muslims. So it should come as no surprise at this point, the current injustice that's being faced in Palestine. And with these recent events, it's caused a lot of turmoil and animosity between our Muslim community and various non-Muslim communities throughout the world. And as a result, let's take an example. So on October 7th, during the days of the event, there was a hashtag that started trending on Twitter. Hashtag Hitler was right. And unfortunately, many of our brothers and sisters in the community were reposting under this hashtag. And in retaliation, hashtag Death to Muslims also started trending literally that same day, mere hours later. Now, this, my brothers and sisters, is absolutely shameful behavior. We should not be participating in these baseless acts. We are Muslims, we're better than this. It doesn't matter who started what. It doesn't matter who's in the wrong or who's in the right. Think about what hashtag Hitler was right means. You're affirming the actions of an oppressor that killed over 6 million innocent people while crying for your brothers and sisters in Palestine who are dying at the hands of another oppressor. Do you not see the irony? Do you not see the hypocrisy? Now I want to turn your attention over to this article that I have here on the right that says an Islamic Relief Board member was let go from his position because of his anti-Semitic comments that he made online. Now this shows that systemic racism towards non-Muslim groups not only exists within the general community, but also in positions of power in an organizational body. This organization, mind you, is tasked with providing aid and relief to millions of impoverished Muslims throughout the globe. How do you think news like this affects their reputation? How do you think it affects our reputation as a community? Now, I give you one simple question here. What do we do? Well, we look to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as our guide. The Prophet, no doubt, was the best human being to walk the face of this earth. His character, his mannerisms inspired countless men, women, and children to embrace our religion. And in fact, our Prophet, throughout his seerah, throughout the journey, he encountered many different types of non-Muslims. He encountered those that embraced him with open arms. He encountered those that maybe hesitated at first, but then alhamdulillah, they came around later on. And finally, he encountered those who completely rejected him from start to finish and even ridiculed him, right? But throughout it all, he always maintained his character, and he did that through these 3 characteristics that I want to cover today. Number 1, his kindness was unmatched. He was always kind, always respectful. He was always there for you when you needed him most. Secondly, inclusivity. He had a way of settling aside people's differences and bringing people together to form a sense of community. And finally, diplomacy. In the event of conflict, how did he appease both sides and bring people together to a peaceful resolution? Let's look at our first example today, the nation of Dawah. Now I'm sure many of you are familiar with this story of Dawah, but just a quick recap. So our Prophet approached the nation of Dawah with the sole intention of preaching Islam. Now this in itself is not a crime, it doesn't hurt anyone, but how did that nation respond? They beat him mercilessly. They stoned him to the point where his own slippers were drenched in blood. Now, Angel Jibril came down later on and offered to crush them between two mountains. But what did our Prophet do? He showed compassion. He showed mercy. He knew that one day, if one of their people, by Allah's will, accepted Islam, the rest of the nation would follow suit. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I have a little fun fact here that says, according to modern research, approximately 60% of the nation of Dawah are direct ancestors of the South Asian population. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, let me get a quick show of hands. How many of you here are South Asian? So, if you're from Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, or Sri Lanka, mashallah, that's at least half this room, right? Now, imagine if our Prophet did not show his kindness back then, if he really decided to wipe the nation of Dawah, we may not be standing here today, living, breathing, existing. Subhanallah. My next example, when the Muslims and the Prophet were escaping persecution in Mecca, they were coming to a land that was already inhabited by a few Christian groups and Jewish groups. And as you can imagine, with the mass migration of this new third group, the Ansar, it caused a bit of turmoil and conflict in the area. People didn't know how to divvy up their resources, they didn't know how to share the land, they didn't know how to peacefully coexist. And so what did our Prophet do? He met with many of the tribe leaders at the time, and he drafted the Constitution of Medina. And so this constitution clearly outlined the rights and freedoms of all three groups. So every group had the right to practice their own religion, they had the right to safety and security, and they had the right to participate in economic trade freely. And even there's an instance recorded in Tirmidhi and Bukhari where our Prophet engaged in economic trade with a Jewish man. He traded some of his battle armor for some wheat in return. Now this shows inclusivity because he was able to bring all three groups together. And it shows diplomacy because through this constitution, it clearly outlined the rights and responsibilities for all the people and what their role was in that society. So there was no potential for conflict later on. The last example that I want to cover today, when the Muslims and the Quraysh were at the height of their tensions, right? All three battles have been fought by this point. There was a man by the name of Thumama ibn Uthal, and he was the leader of Banu Hanifa. Banu Hanifa, by the way, was the largest exporter of wheat to the Quraysh. And so, alhamdulillah, Thumama ended up converting to Islam, and he was so enraged by how unjustly the Quraysh had been treating the Muslims that he swore, by Allah, I will no longer sell a single grain of wheat to the Quraysh if the Prophet does not want me to. The Prophet, after hearing this news, he could have easily used this to his advantage. Starve out your opposition and then attack when they're weak, right? It's a perfect battle strategy. But what did he do instead? He showed compassion for even his enemies. He urged Thumama to lift his sanctions and continue selling wheat to the Quraysh. Now this, as I said, it shows compassion even for his enemies, but it also shows diplomacy, because if he were to continue with his sanctions on the Quraysh, then perhaps this would have further enraged the Quraysh. It would have led to more conflict and increased tension, right? Maybe more bloodshed would have occurred later on. And so finally, after the Muslims had finally conquered Mecca, right, they finally gained victory. What did our Prophet do to the Quraysh? We know from modern history and throughout history that when a nation or a group of people, they conquer a certain piece of land, what does the king or the leader of that group usually do? They usually enslave or exterminate the current inhabitants of that land. We've seen that in Palestine for the last 75 years. But what did our Prophet do instead? He just simply let them go. The same people who tortured him, who drove him out of his home, he showed compassion in return. To sum everything up, how should we interact with non-Muslims? We should emulate these same characteristics that I've been talking about today. Number one, kindness or respect. This is obvious. If you want to have respect, you should treat people the way you want to be treated. Secondly, inclusion. We live in Canada, a land of diversity. We should accommodate people as much as possible, right? We, on a daily basis, we interact with people of many different cultural backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, and so we must establish this common ground. And this may come in the form of inviting your non-Muslim friends to Muslim gatherings. That's a perfect way of breaking that barrier. And finally, diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy. I can't stress enough how important diplomacy is. In the event of conflict, we must be civil. We must be respectful of other people's viewpoints and opinions. Because at the end of the day, we are the ambassadors of Islam. Non-Muslims look to us to judge their religion. And as a result, it is our duty and responsibility to portray this religion in the best manner possible. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.